Okay. All right. Well, good morning, everyone. I am Jennifer Slattery with the League of Cities and Towns, and we're excited to have our friends from Downs Construction here today to talk about capital project budget control. And I'm sure they will make it much more exciting than it sounds, because I've seen their slides and they're quite lovely. So welcome this morning to our workshop Wednesday. We will not be having a session next week, given the proximity to Thanksgiving, but I'll be in touch on any upcoming sessions beyond. And I think at this point, I'll just turn it over to Diana Colcord. Diana, thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Thank you for your efforts in pulling this program together. Good morning, everyone. My name is Diana Colcord, and today I will be acting as the panel's moderator. But my day-to-day job revolves around solving problems for municipalities by bringing the right resources to the table for project success. I've been in the design and construction industry for about 35 years, including many cycles of both positive growth as well as economic downturn. And as an industry, we've weathered all of these downturns, but not without some sacrifices and lessons learned. And these lessons learned are what we bring to you today. So since you're all contemplating or in the process of a capital project, your goals will include protecting the integrity of the program and budget, a concern of both town administrators and taxpayers. Upgrading community spaces adds value to the lives of your residents, but the myriad of decisions that you're going to have to make and the process that you are going to have to go through will be challenging during this economic time. On construction projects, we've seen this volatility in both material prices and labor, adding a new level of complexity to planning and budgeting projects. For certain trades, it's not even unheard of to see increases of 10% or more in just the span of months. So the question is, how do you sort through all of these uncertainties while protecting taxpayer dollars? What you're going to hear from our panel is how they will create a safety net around your projects so that all market conditions are considered and communicated, and that surprises are significantly reduced and your project remains viable. Some areas that this panel will explore include using construction trend data supplemented by current information from suppliers and subcontractors. That way you have intelligence on today's current cost trends for specific materials and trade labor. 2, identifying available grant monies and maximizing their benefit by carefully following procedures, not jeopardizing any free money available. And 3, since time equals money, shortening the design and construction cycle is key. So working with the project team to come to alignment on design concepts much earlier than would have been done in the past. This starts the clock sooner on bidding and awarding the project, which means locking in pricing and securing materials in the supply chain earlier. So the good news for you is that there are strategies to mitigate economic pressures. If you are in the concept or design phase of a project, supply chains are already easing, which will reduce construction material prices experienced over the past few years. Now, just a quick bio on Downs. Downs has been in business for 88 years with a base of business in Providence. We have a staff of 75 working on over $500 million worth of projects currently in phases ranging from concept through move-in. Our projects range from schools and public safety facilities to community centers and town halls, libraries and museums, as well as historic buildings. Simply put, Downs is a municipal construction provider. We're also a full service provider offering both owner's program management services as well as construction services. And unique to Downs is our in-house ability to help clients define projects in conception and take them through completion with same team. We help clients develop RFPs for choosing design and construction teams. We work with them to make sure that the project is accurately budgeted and scheduled. We offer value management ideas, phase plans, and bid packaging. During construction, we monitor the budget, schedule, and quality of work and do all the paperwork for our clients, providing problem solving along the way. All of this has an effect on the budget. and we make sure to be as efficient as possible. I'm going to turn this over to the panel now, but I encourage you, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, to use the chat box to ask questions or raise your hand, which we will then pose to the panel either during or after the presentation. And with that, I invite the panel to introduce themselves.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Dave Patrick. I'm the president of Downs Construction. I have over 40 years of experience. The majority of my experience has been in Rhode Island as well as throughout New England.
Good morning, Joe DeSanti, Rhode Island Program Director. I have 35 years of program management and construction management experience, and primarily in the public market.
Good morning, everybody. Jeff Anderson, Vice President of Pre-Construction for Downs. I've been with Downs Construction for over 25 years now, helping municipalities such as you work their way through the pre-construction process on projects within their towns and cities.
So let's talk a little bit about the market overview. We've lived through the majority of a worldwide pandemic, and that created a lot of interesting conflicts within certainly the global economy, but I'll focus mostly on construction. When the pandemic hit, one thing that certainly happened was on the manufacturing side. So let's start on the manufacturing side. Many of our offshore manufacturers were hit with what was considered to be a labor shortage, albeit in most cases it was everyone sent their labor force home, and the manufacturing took a toll because they were unable to put the people to work in the COVID environment. And coupled with that, there was a tremendous amount of product that was being imported, generally speaking, coming in through the coast of California. And most of you may remember that at one point, I think we had 400 container ships off the coast of California that were unable to get to the port, also because of a labor shortage, and we could not unload that product. Now, meanwhile, while that was going on and that disruption happened in the manufacturing sector, back here in New England, with the exception, I think, of Boston, the construction industry was deemed an essential business. So we were continuing to put construction in place. We were continuing to put all of the manufactured products, the equipment, the materials, we were putting that in place. But meanwhile, the backlog of the manufacturing side of our business really took a hit and caused a delay. In addition to that, many cities and towns had a delay in issuing RFPs and RFQs for projects, and the start of the new projects got substantially delayed. And then, at least as it relates to here in New England, back in November of last year, all of a sudden there was a surge of additional projects coming out. RFQs were being released, RFPs were being released, projects were being planned, and then we were in essence flooding the market again. So, as we all know, the feds have looked at the interest rates. We've gone through substantial interest rate hikes. That is going to slow down the construction industry. That is going to have an effect on projects getting started, and it is going to slow down the need for the manufactured materials. So we are seeing considerable changes in the routing of manufactured materials, certainly from foreign countries. That shipping supply that, as I mentioned, the majority of which came into California, is now being rerouted into the Gulf of Mexico and up and down the East Coast, albeit that is a more expensive route for these manufacturers to get their product into the U.S. supply chain. So really what happened was we had an abundance of construction projects. We had a limited supply of materials, and what we saw was inflation and escalation to the cost of construction. And I can tell you that in our in our world, because we're involved in projects that are in various phases, those changes happened so quickly that it was very difficult for certainly the distributors and the subcontractors to keep track of what the cost was. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that. Then, in addition to that, we had a substantial amount of federal funds, state and federal funds, that were put into the marketplace to fund planned projects. So it really was kind of the perfect storm, which is, albeit starting to calm down now, but it was really the perfect storm. And so what does that do for us in the future? On the construction side, I think that we are going to see a slowdown in private development for sure, mostly due to the cost of construction as well as the interest rates. Private development projects are going to have an awfully hard time making their pro formas work and being able to finance their projects at the higher interest rates. On the municipal project side, we have seen a movement in most, I would say probably 65% of our projects, our municipal customers have gone back and gotten additional funds through grants and through other funding agencies to push those projects forward as originally planned. The other 35% of our customers have said, no, this is all we can afford to build, and we need to redesign these projects and get these projects inside of that budget. And so we've worked hard and on both cases to predict what the cost is for the expanded projects and to curtail the cost of the other projects to fit within the original budget. The labor market on the construction side has not changed an awful lot. But what does happen in times where you have a tremendous amount of construction work out in the marketplace is you see that in sort of the trade world, you see that there are a number of subcontractor forces that generally are compiled with a working foreman or a non-working foreman, depending on the size of the crew, a number of journeymen and a number of apprenticeships. Now, when we get busy, what you see is you get journeymen that are being promoted to foreman, apprentices become journeymen, but the challenge there is that we are promoting people that do not necessarily have the experience, and therefore labor, although the hourly cost of labor doesn't go up, the amount of labor hours that are put to these projects do go up because they simply are not as efficient as they are when you have very experienced foremen running these projects and very experienced journeymen working underneath them. So now that we're seeing a little bit of a slowdown, I think that we are going to see the overall labor cost come down, not on an hourly basis for what these folks are being paid, but more from an efficiency factor, because we are going to quote unquote have sort of the A teams running these projects in various sectors and putting the work in place faster. So I do see that the future of the labor market will get more efficient, albeit it will not be at a reduced hourly rate. On the supply chain, that has really put a crimp in building projects. In my 40 years of experience, I think I don't ever remember having as an example, a main switchgear for a building taking longer than 12 to 14 weeks. If it was sort of run of the mill and simple, you could get it in 8 weeks. And if it was a little more complicated, maybe a little bit bigger, it would take 12 to 14 weeks. We have recently been quoted as much as 70 weeks to get the switchgear. And so when we find those particular items that are difficult, we are constantly working on the front end of these projects to get those things ordered actually months before we break ground in construction. So I think we'll talk a little bit more about that in our presentation, but that's sort of an overview of what we have what we've experienced here with this COVID pandemic and things that have been going on in the marketplace.
Good morning. So I think it's important to understand some unique aspects of the Rhode Island market. It's a small state, it's a nimble state, things change quickly, good and bad. A number of factors have contributed to the significant change in the design and construction market over the last 3 to 5 years. Notwithstanding COVID escalation, inflation that has occurred, it's important to understand how the market has changed so you could adapt and plan your projects. Rhode Island has become a significant economic force in the New England region due to its location, diversity of workforce, and access to higher education. There's, as Dave said, numerous private developments. There's a lot of public improvements, and there's the Amazon warehouse factor. They come in, they buy the market and the subcontractor market and jump the line of material vendors. These are all realities of what's happening out there right now. You factor that in with the expiration of the school construction moratorium, it's a perfect recipe for a boom in the design and construction market, which is all great news. But as great news as that is, last week, the voters approved another $1 billion in referendum bonds, including another $250 million in school construction bond. In 2018, that $250 million PAYGO bond translated to approximately $2 billion worth of work. So again, flooding the market. This time, it'll probably be closer to $1 billion worth of work just because of the PAYGO formula has changed. So what's interesting is the market has changed. It's flipped upside down on its head. The biggest challenge was never finding the project. It was always finding the money. Now, funding, seems to be no end to it, regardless of whether you go in ARPA, ESSER, RIDE. There seems to be grants coming from everywhere. We just recently were in a meeting with the U.S. Wildlife, and they have some fund grant money that they're looking at. So it's all good news, but it does create additional challenges now. And with those challenges, I'll give you an example of one challenge that is contractors having difficult time with not only construction managers or general contractors, but architects having the appropriate enough positions and resources to be able to do projects. So one of the things that we've done recently is we're extending the solicitation to out-of-state design and construction firms who are eager to work in Rhode Island. That brings in some new individuals. One of the added benefits is we're seeing is reduced costs. These firms are eager to come work in Rhode Island, and you're seeing a better, more competitive number. Another approach that we have done just recently and doing successfully is the design build approach. So you develop an RFP that allows you to have a construction company and architect come in and form a relationship to work together in the early stages. They work hand in hand. The construction company understands exactly what's happening on a daily basis with design and will be able to respond to those designs. Also to give immediate feedback to the architect. Hey, we're seeing some delays in these types of products, or that cost seems to be escalating. You can make those changes immediately. And it provides immediate responses. It provides a team that is working together, and it leads to a better and thorough set of construction documents. It actually has been instrumental in helping us starting and completing the Newport Pell Elementary School, which happened right in the midst of COVID and the escalation. We have just started the Lincoln Physical Education Center, which has been a great project that we just started. It's a fast track project. And we, I think, awarded just 3 months ago, and we already have foundations in. We have the steel being delivered next week for the building, and we have an anticipated opening in June of 23, which is amazing. We're also using this delivery method right now with the new Spaziano Elementary School and the Debate Elementary School. And again, the other thing that we're seeing from this is there's an added benefit. The fact that the construction manager and architect are forming this relationship, it has translated to reduced fees. And a better coordination of schedule, which again, time is money. We're getting projects done quicker, which is also reducing the cost for any of the construction staff or architect staff as well. One of the other examples of challenges that we're having is subs are very busy and being selective. That's driving up costs. What we're doing is working with the construction teams, or as with constructors, we're working to make those packages a little bit more better for them to look at by having the documents being as thorough as possible, and also maybe breaking up those packages. So you're breaking it up to having a couple of smaller contractors. So you're building the capacity by bringing more contractors in as well. The long and short of it is there is over the last 30 years, there's been a decline in the construction and design labor forces. And that is now directly resulting in, a lot of these firms struggling to keep up and having to either work together to get these done, or to work to get some new young workforce members involved in the process as well. And that's part of what we're doing is in every community we go, we make sure that we have an apprenticeship program. That's another thing, is that getting into your community, getting into your schools, getting people interested in getting into the construction trades and certainly the design trades as well. Next slide, please. So having a roadmap, I think, is always important. It kind of keeps everybody on task. It helps you measure what you're doing, and it kind of gives everybody an idea of where you are in the process. Besides looking at this, schedule that we would have, it's always good to have something visual so that you can keep track of it. One of the important things is to make sure you understand and engage all of the stakeholders early on and understand what those goals are for that. Getting a plan together is very important. That plan could change, it could be tweaked, but getting things on paper and understanding that. Getting the building committee members together, getting the right building committee members together, having it, with different backgrounds on there is always a positive as well as have some of those key stakeholders. The important thing that you need to do is understand that you need some professional help too. Get an OPM engaged early on, get an architect, get an engineer involved if you think that you need that. For a small amount of money, it might help you avoid some of the costly mistakes that happen down the road. One of the things that we have been working with, and again, I'll use Lincoln as a great example, is research similar projects. Once you have an idea of what that is, with Lincoln Physical Education Center, one of the things they did is they started visiting other facilities. This is what we like. This is what we don't like. It helped them develop that project concept. They also spoke to the people that are using these facilities. What would you have done differently? These are all good things. Let someone else's lessons learned help you to manage your project a little bit better. We're doing the same thing right now. We're touring a lot of media centers and schools throughout Rhode Island, because there's a media center grant that's coming out from the state of Rhode Island. And we're looking to put some programming together, and we're learning a lot by going into either public or private libraries and media centers and understanding what worked for them and what didn't work for them. So again, let those lessons learned work for you. One of the other important things is always establishing and managing that budget. Again, it's something that you can change at any given time, but putting it down and making sure that you have all the appropriate things in there. And I'll get a little bit more into that later on. Understanding the rules and the approvals with your council approvals, your referendum, your procurement policy, I think is really important to understand what aspects. And again, going back to the ARPA ESSER, there are certain rules that go with those. So you really need to understand that. And one of the challenges is sometimes the funding isn't as clear as it could be as to what those rules might be. So, again, engage in that help of the experts, have somebody come and help you get through that process early on so that you don't make a mistake and lose time going through that. I'm going to jump forward a little bit. I think something that's really important that I think is something you need to keep an eye on too is the setup procedures. What we see many times is we get involved in some of these projects and the municipality doesn't have the right procedures in place. Anticipate the unknowns. recognize that you're going to have to start processing payment applications. Make sure you have a process in place, change orders, controls, those kind of things that need to be put in place early on, so that when that happens, you're prepared to do it. Keeping money flowing is also important. If you want to get the contractors there, you want to get subcontractors interested in the project and give you the best price, they're going to go somewhere where they feel that an owner has all the process in place, knows that payments aren't going to be a problem either. So again, clear, concise information always helps with providing subcontractors an opportunity to come and bid on a project. And the other last thing that I'll leave with is the ensuring that training is done. Again, this is something else that happens afterwards as your project gets ready to close out. And that's why it's important that you have this roadmap, so that there's a lot of pieces to it. You always understand that at the end of the day, you want to have a project that is successful, and you could have done everything right and got the project done on budget, on schedule. And at the end of the day, if people aren't trained properly, if you don't have all the documents that you need, you're still going to be struggling through that. So that's some of the things that you need to look at, is put everything down that you can in a plan and on paper. And that's, something as a project manager or construction manager that we do on a daily basis.
Thanks, Joe. Jeff Anderson again here. What we have on the first slide here is an actual picture of one of our estimators trying to explain estimates to a municipal client. But no, all joking aside, we think this meme really represents what we've been dealing with in the past year and a half as a construction company. Certainly myself, Dave, Joe, and our estimators have all had to try to explain to cities and towns what has occurred with budgets that may have been prepared up to a few years ago to what the costs are being reflected as now. Next slide, Diana. So I'll try to focus a little bit more on some specifics related to the pre-construction on this slide, and then the next slide in bidding, and the things that we've been dealing with specifically, and ways we can try to mitigate these concerns moving forward. So in terms of designing to your budget, what we mean for that is your OPM, your CM should be advising you in conjunction with the design team to make sure that we're looking at the budget that's been established, the components that are a requirement of a program going into your specific project are being met, but we're not adding things that you can't afford. We're looking at finishes, we're looking at MEP systems, we're looking at the facades of the building, and making sure at those early stages in the job that that design team is being considerate of what has been established, and we don't have the Mercedes-Benz when we're looking for the Ford, if you know what I mean from an analogy perspective. So that's what we need to focus on in the very early stages of those initial design concepts, schematic designs that your design team develops. So one of the things that we're also doing a lot is what we call design assist. So design assist really works well, particularly in the MEP, mechanical, electrical, plumbing areas of a construction project. So instead of a situation where your construction manager potentially is doing budgets for your mechanical system, that mechanical system comes in over budget, your design team has to go back to the drawing board and reduce scope, reduce the type of system. Working directly with a mechanical company to design a system that works within your budget, putting it on them to be the ones that are responsible to comply with the budget expectations of your particular project. So it works well, again, in that mechanical, electrical, and plumbing area of a project as an example. And because of the extensive inflation and escalation that we've been dealing with in the recent past, we are establishing healthy escalation allowances and escalation clauses in the contracts to try to manage what we see moving forward in for the balance of 22, 23, and relatively into 24. We do still see for the balance of this year a continued escalation process above average in 2023, hopefully some leveling off of the percentage to the normal, 2.5%, 3% that we always experienced in the construction market by the time we get to 2024. Off to the right of this slide, we have some examples of the cost increases that we've seen in various materials that would go into all of your projects, depending on the scope of work that's undertaken, all of which were, very extremely hard to predict at one point, the latter part of last year into the early part of this year. But again, real increases impacting budgets and the bottom line on projects. And then, as mentioned earlier, both by Dave and Joe, extensive lead times. We say at this point, certainly a job that has brand new electrical switchgear, as David mentioned, we can't complete projects in a year because it's taking a year just to get the electrical switchgear in the transformer and generators, for instance, on certain facilities. So we have to plan that in. We have to understand that at the beginning in the pre-construction process so that we're augmenting the schedule, augmenting the budget to be able to incorporate those types of things. And then last but not least on this slide, we'll talk about working with the local trade contractor market. Now, in the state of Rhode Island, with the amount of money that is being allocated for construction, we have to be considerate of the trade contractor market that will support these projects. But we see that local contractors have a vested interest in their municipal projects, either by their kids go to that new school, they want that new police department in their particular town and are interested in participating in those jobs and can help through the pre-construction process to potentially assist in cost modeling and provide some input on lead times on what they're seeing, because again, they have that vested interest in that particular project. Next slide. So in terms of bidding, as it relates to inflation, escalation, and market trends, we've established some unique strategies because of the realm that we've been dealing with as of late. And that is early release packages. What that means is we're looking at ways to pre-purchase items. So pre-purchasing mechanical equipment, as an example, when you're talking 6, 7, 8 to 10 months to try to get that type of thing. We've talked about the electrical equipment, switchgear. We're working on pre-purchasing of switchgear. So we're talking about going out to trade contractors at an early stage with the plans and specifications from your design team to solicit pricing on these things early in the process. In some cases, picking up 2 to 3 months on the overall normal process if we were a way to do a typical bid and build scenario, helping you on the back end. And again, the back end of the overall construction project is resulting in cost savings to obviously because of a reduced schedule. We're looking at multiple submittals. So what that means is when we have contractors on board, a particular flooring product has been specified, we ask them to submit an alternate flooring product at the same time, in case by the time we're ready to release the approval of that particular material, that material has a longer lead time or takes longer to get. We have a second option immediately to react to try to mitigate that as a delay to your project. Getting a little bit more into the weeds is what we call pre-detailing of reinforcing bar, the reinforcing bar that goes in to your new foundation for a building. So we're looking at doing that early in the stages of a job as a professional service, so that when a concrete contractor, the one that builds your foundation, is brought on board, their shop drawings to be able to purchase that reinforcing bar are already prepared and approved and essentially ready to release an order. Again, picking up upwards of a month or two at that early stage in order to improve the overall schedule. So in terms of trade contractor workloads, I think Joe touched on it a little bit, is that there is what we call market saturation right now. There's a lot of money out there to be spent, a lot of money being allocated to construction projects. Contractors are being selective. So how do we avoid that? So what we recommend to our clients is that we focus early on in pre-construction on planning and making sure that the project is clear as possible on what the expectations are, what the details are, when the schedule will start, when the schedule will finish, any phasing, any logistical concerns are all outlined on paper ahead of time, so that when a bidder is looking at this job, They're saying this project is attractive and I want to provide pricing for it, resulting in as much competition as possible for your towns and cities. And then last but not least, I'll talk about managing risks. So managing risk from an owner perspective and a subcontractor perspective, really. I think it really comes back to that concept of planning that job ahead of time, having the right team together, both yourselves, your OPMs, your construction managers, your architects, to ensure that it's clear. And that we're putting these types of statements and concerns within contracts to the subcontractors so that they don't feel that they have to assume that, for instance, that after they've submitted a bid, it's going to take upwards of 90 days for them to be issued a contract for a particular job. Now that 90 days, they're going to have to build in potential escalation because of that time period. So again, if we're clear on what the individual municipality's process is to get from bid to contract award or notice to proceed, it's only going to pay dividends as it relates to the bid that you receive during this very critical stage of the projects that we implement in your towns and cities. Joe?
So there is a question that just came in. Do we anticipate additional cost increases and supply chain delays as a result of the 2 recent hurricanes in Florida? I don't know, Dave, if you want to grab that and then hand it off if we need to.
Sure. I think the quick answer to that is yes, it is going to have an effect on the overall construction. It's too big. And to be quite honest, I've not even heard estimates. I've asked a couple of folks in the insurance industry if they've heard estimates of what the overall damage and resultant cost is going to be to rebuild Florida. But the answer to the question is yes, I do think we are going to see some additional delays on certain pieces of equipment, and certainly, the raw materials, the plywood, the roofing materials, the exterior aluminum, glass. Those kinds of things are going to be impacted by what's gone on down in Florida. Good question, by the way.
Yeah, and Dave, I'll add to that is the answer is absolutely yes, and we're seeing it already. Many of the projects we're working on in Rhode Island need the hurricane grade glazing, Newport, Providence, and we're seeing that already where there either a delay or significant change in what the glazing cost was. Actually, on the Rogers High School, perfect example, we had in a 1 month period of time, we had a 15% increase on the glazing right after the hurricane. So unfortunately, yes, it will have an impact. So getting into developing your budget, this is probably the single most important document that you will have. In addition to once you determine what the project concept is, what we see many times is that, that there aren't proper allocation of dollars where they need to be. Many times, when somebody looks at a project, they go, okay, we need an architect, we need a constructor, and that's our project budget. Well, that's not necessarily the case. There's a lot of other items that need to be reviewed. There needs to be allocation for those items, so that as the project progresses, you ensure that you have enough dollars for it. And on the owner side, there's always money for getting the money. Right, getting the money, closing things, looking at contracts. There's legal costs. There's costs for issuance of bonds. There's builder's risk, which is something that's usually not thought about until after the fact. FF&E and technology. Once the project is completed, you want to have some kind of furniture. You want to have the proper technology. And then even on the professional side, you want to have those other additional professional services there, whether it's an environmental assessment, geotech evaluation, commissioning agent, having somebody come in and commission the building, whether it's the building envelope or the mechanical system, and moving services. We see that often that somebody doesn't think, oh, well, we could have had somebody move us, but they really don't go through the process of understanding what those costs are and what has to happen. So, developing that initial estimate and budget, and it's a live document. So if things change, you can move those dollars around. If you need to allocate more dollars for it, you at least are always monitoring and managing it. So it's important to always have that fully developed budget. And before we talk a little bit about referendums, one of the things that I was thinking about was, another important thing that is helps you with risk, whether you're in the planning stages or prior to construction, is forensic investigation. So I think it's important, if you go into an existing building, spend the time, spend the money to make sure that you look behind some of those walls, as opposed to assuming something there. Have those design professionals go in and, do some maybe selective demo, lift some ceiling tiles, make sure that what you think is there is really there, because it's going to save a lot of time and money in the future. So the other thing that's important to prepare for is the referendum process. We've been fortunate enough to be involved with a number of projects recently, Newport, Westerly, and Providence, just in the last 2 years alone. And what's important to make them successful is getting the information out early, making sure your messaging is consistent, having community meetings, having a clear, concise message, having the availability of the material so that people can look at it and understand it, and just have the facts down on paper. Westerly is a perfect example. They had 2 failed bond referendums in the past. Not that they didn't try, I think but the messaging was different this time. As we got involved and helped in the early stages, we made sure that from day one that the message was the same on what the projects were going to be, a clear, concise document that tells you what was going to be included in there, what the cost to taxpayers might be. I think those are important things to make sure that the community, the taxpayers, all understand what the project will be and what the benefits will be to it, as well as in some cases what the benefits to not happening, right? So what are the repercussions if the project doesn't occur? I think is an important fact to get there. Dave?
Okay, so let's talk about directing the course of construction. And I think we've sort of highlighted a lot of different things today in terms of things that we're seeing that might be a little different than we have seen in the past. But let's touch on a couple of specific points. Change order management. It is not a good term in construction, and nobody likes it. And what I think is important on change order management is to have a plan as to how you're going to handle change orders right from the beginning. And what happens in change order management is not necessarily just putting out a sketch, getting a price, and issuing an amendment to a subcontractor agreement. This process needs to start right at the beginning of the project, whereby you set the rules and the guidelines as to how and what can be charged in the change order process. And I'll give you by way of an example. If in your bid documents, you talk about change order management from a subcontractor standpoint, and you identify things that are not going to be permitted in a change order, i.e. a non-working foreman, or the truck that is positioned on the project site, or a tool allowance. There are certain things that can get added to change orders that can force those change orders to cost more money than is realistic. When you talk about a non-working foreman, as an example, from our perspective, we allow our subcontractors 10% overhead and a 5% profit on our changes. That 10% overhead covers the non-working foreman. But if you don't clearly articulate that at the beginning of the job, you can run into a problem when you get to the negotiation on change orders. And that's just one example. Pandemic recovery. We are coming out of the pandemic, I hope. And I think what we're going to see is, because of the interest rates, we are going to see a little bit of a decline in the construction sector. It is going to slow down. We are going to see things get back a little bit to normal. And so I see that projects are going to hopefully get back onto a more streamlined process. But in the next couple of years, they are still going to have to touch on the proper planning of these projects, as we have talked about. We are going to have to pre-order equipment. We are going to have to order materials up front. We are going to have to plan for those things that we know are still going to be problematic as we go through the construction process. Schedule management. I think it's one of the most important tools on the project next to the budget. The schedule management really tells the story. And I tell people all the time, a construction project is really not a lot different than telling a story. You've got to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And you need to understand the important factors with what goes on in the beginning. As an example, what are the particular approval processes in any particular city and town? And how do you mitigate those approval processes to get the project up and out of the ground as quickly as possible? Also, when I talk about getting a project up and out of the ground, we always maintain that if we can get the foundation in, get out from underground, most of what goes above the ground is much easier for us to control. And then you talk about the closeout portion, and Joe touched on the training of how this building is going to operate and how this building is going to work. We recently, I think it's probably about 8 or 9 months ago, institute a terrific plan on the closeout of all of our buildings, and it's a barcode that goes on every single piece of equipment. And if you focus your camera on your phone over that barcode, it's going to bring you to a menu that can give you the original submittal. It will give you the training videos of how that equipment works. It will give you the maintenance schedule, when it was last maintained, and give you all the pertinent information about each and every piece of that piece of equipment. So the closeout process, I think, is also one of the more important pieces. And we talk about it here internally all the time, that closeout starts right at the beginning of the job. Start assembling your closeout documentation with each subcontractor that comes on the project. So it simplifies that process at the end. When we talk about simplifying building design and systems, it's very interesting. We had a meeting with the head of DAS construction in Connecticut not that long ago, and he really made it a point to ask us to make sure that we're trying to simplify the design of these buildings. In some cases, we have witnessed buildings that are technologically very far advanced. However, the people that are operating the building, maintaining the building, are not able to keep up with that technology. And so every time something goes wrong, they're having to hire a specialty contractor to come in and mitigate what the failures are. So in addition to that, I would also say that the simplifying of the design can help you on the schedule side. We've noticed that many of the pieces of equipment, and I'll harp on switchgear again, but switchgear, the main switches, the fuses are all controlled by computer chips. To the extent that you can mitigate the number of computer chips on the project in total will also help you from a schedule standpoint. As we all know, computer chips and everything that we do are a long lead item, including our cars. When we talk about facilitating and mandating stored materials, we're really talking about the overall project helping to get the materials that are required for the project available as quickly as possible. When we say mandate stored materials, what we're talking about is write that into the subcontract agreement, that the subcontractors are required to get their materials submittals in, get them approved, get their materials ordered. And when we say facilitate on the backside, what we're saying is it's incumbent upon the entire project team to make stored material availability, storage area available to a particular project. And I know that's a difficult one on certain projects, but to the extent that you can, very helpful to mitigate the overall schedule process. And then predicting cost versus committed cost. We talk about this all the time. When you go through the process of doing a schematic design estimate, and then a design development estimate, and then a construction document estimate, keep in mind that those are predicting costs. Those are always estimates. To the extent that you can get your project out on the street, get it subcontracted for, and get to a committed cost, that's when you can really start to control what happens within that budget. So those are just some high level points on directing the course of construction.
I'm going to jump in before we go to our do's and don'ts slide. I wanted to ask Jeff a question. And Jeff, I'm wondering if you could speak to the group about a municipal project that you've been involved with that was trending over budget during the design phase, which many of them do, and what you needed to do to get them back in line with what the owner's budget actually was.
Sure, Diana, thanks. So first and foremost, let me talk a little bit about the process of estimating in pre-construction. Our policy and our procedure immediately at those early stages of the project, when we're doing a schematic design budget, SD budget, as we say, we put together a cost management list. Sometimes it's referred to as value engineering. I prefer to call it cost management. And we put that together as we're doing our estimate in looking at the drawings and the details, and trying to understand exactly, okay, what is the architect and engineer showing? Is there a better way to do it? Is there a better detail? Is there a better system? So we have that in our pocket immediately as we complete the individual estimate cycle to say we're trending slightly over budget on the schematic design estimate. Here's some things that we're seeing that we think we could do right off almost immediately to try to pull the project back in line. I can think of a particular town hall project, not the one we have on the screen, but a very similar building that a municipality was going from an existing structure built in the 30s or 40s, and the purchasing department had a certain amount of square footage that they were used to within the building. And they assumed that, well, we're just going to need the same exact amount of square footage in the new building that we're constructing. So we became a little bit over budget at the DD level and went back to them and said, okay, let's look at some of these square footages. Is this as efficient as you really need it in today's modern municipal building? And we were able to pull back some square footages without sacrificing anything from an operational standpoint at that particular municipal structure.
Thank you.
So one of the things we like to do is sort of talk about the do's and the don'ts. And some of these are very obvious and some of them may not be quite so obvious. Do keep the public officials informed on budget status. And really what we're talking about there is really be good communicators. People do not like surprises. People want to be informed and people want to know accurate information. We always encourage people to work with multiple trade contractors to gauge what's going on in today's market. When I tell you that our pricing models change almost weekly, I'm not embellishing on that. They are changing constantly. One of the things that our pre-construction group does is meet with some of the larger trade contractors every couple of weeks in a little touch base meeting to find out if anything has changed since our last meeting. So rely on the trade contractors to help with the most up-to-date information. On the funding side, learn about every feasible grant. There are a number of funding sources out there. We have multiple projects that we are segregating cost and identifying costs that fits into and can be funded by a particular grant based on what the regulations are within that grant. And be overall really look at space planning and be realistic for the total square footage that's required for the budget. And the one thing I would add to that, when we run into this a lot, is when you get into the architectural planning phase, the architectural side, because they're trying to communicate the amount of space that a particular department or area might have, they're always working with what the net square footage is. On the construction side, you're building the gross square footage, and that can change. That can be a difference of anywhere from 10% up to 20%. And so make sure that when you're talking about square footages, everybody understands whether you're talking about the net square feet, the gross square feet, and then be realistic about the amount of square footage that you really need. As we talked about, start with a detailed budget template. Make sure that you have all of the cost, major cost categories identified. If you know, and we run into this on a number of occasions. We're all asked in our daily lives and with clients and with architects, as an example, Dave, how much does it cost to build a school? And then it starts a conversation. Well, is the school brand new? Do we have to demolish an old school? Is it a renovation? Is it an occupied renovation? Are there hazardous materials? Do we have subsoil problems? So there is no easy answer to how much does a school cost or how much does any other type of project cost. You really need to understand some of the pertinent information. And that's why we talk about that timeline of how we plan these projects. And then, you know, the master schedule, you really need real data in a master schedule. And you need someone that understands the scheduling characteristics of, you know, what happens first, what happens second, you know, how much time could be encountered in a delay, where can you make up time, but have a master schedule that has all of the towns and cities approval processes baked into the logic of that schedule so that you can really predict when the schedules are going to start and stop. And then on the don't side, don't hide bad news. It never goes away. And conversely, don't assume the best case scenario because it rarely happens. Don't, you know, as it says, don't wait until the last minute to plan your referendum. We talked about that. Get out ahead of that early on. And don't exclude members of the building committee that have construction design and financial experience. Those are really critical to the makeup of a well-rounded building committee. Assuming your existing facility or new building site doesn't have hidden changes, if you're building anywhere here in New England, that's a risky proposition because we are constantly having to assess the cost of the hazardous materials, underground unforeseen issues, utility challenges, and there's a host of those types of things. But generally, there's probably not many of those types of things we haven't seen. But if you get the professionals involved early on, you can have an intelligent conversation to make sure you don't get hit with any of those surprises. So that's a short list of do's and don'ts, but I think we're certainly open to any questions that you folks might have as it relates to other things that you might think about that we haven't touched on.
Yes, there is another question here. Are you finding that there are problems finding contractors or subcontractors to perform the work or bid the work with the overwhelming amount of money and projects in the planning stages or in the future?
Jeff, you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. Certainly there is that issue. I did touch upon that a little bit on the slides that I was going through, is that there is market saturation. To your point, there's a lot of money being spent out there. So trade contractors are being selective. So it really just goes back to my statements in regards to proper planning, implementation, and explaining the project to make the contractors attracted to your individual job. In tandem with what Joe had mentioned, is bringing outside of Rhode Island contractors to Rhode Island to bid these projects, which helps with the overall trade contractor base that can support, you know, the individual trade packages that may be being solicited. And that in turn helps, obviously, the competition and the bids that we receive. But in summary, yes, it is a challenge throughout New England right now because of the amount of money that's out there.
And I would emphasize a well thought out, well planned, well organized project that gets out in the marketplace. I have yet to see subcontractors not have an interest in those projects.
While you're all thinking of your questions, I just have a couple administrative things that I wanted to mention. we'll be following up with a copy of the presentation. And then if you're interested, we would be willing to offer the same panel discussion to any of your within your towns, who community members or public officials, mayors, anyone who has a keen interest in project budgeting. And then the other thing is that this is an AIA accredited program for CEU credit. So if anyone needs to get credit, this is one way to do it. And if you just shoot your email to me in the chat, we can take care of that.
Any other questions, folks?
Maybe we answered them all.
It was very thorough and very wonderfully colorful. Oh, all right. Well, with that in mind, maybe you guys want to just pop your emails? Maybe Diana, you want to pop your email in the chat so
Sure.
folks have it. And I am recording the session as well. So thank you, Diana. And so it just takes a moment for the video to go through, and then I'll put it on our YouTube channel as well. If anyone needs to access that and isn't familiar with it, just send me an email and I'd be happy to get you the link. As Diana said, she'll be following up with the actual PowerPoint and other information for you folks. So I just want to thank our friends from Downs Construction for giving us this wonderful overview, and thank all of you folks for attending. And as I said, no workshop Wednesday next week, but we'll be in touch on the following topics beyond that. So hope you all have a good Thanksgiving, and thanks again to our friends at Downs.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
very
you so
much,
much.
everyone.
Take care, everyone. Happy
Thank you.
Thanksgiving.
Take care.